Book 10 of Metaphysics by Aristotle, Chapter 1. That indeed wisdom is a certain science conversant about first principles is evident from the early portions of this work, in which doubts have been expressed respecting statements that have been put forward by others concerning first principles. One, however, would feel doubtful as to whether it would be requisite to suppose wisdom or ontology to constitute one science or many. For, if it does constitute one science, there is at any rate one science invariably of contraries. But first principles are not contraries. If, however, it does not constitute one science, as of what quality must we posit these many sciences? Further, to speculate into demonstrative first principles, is it the province of one or of many sciences? For, if of one science, why, let me ask, is it the province of this more than of any other whatsoever? But if such speculation belong to many sciences, what sort must we consider these to be? Moreover, whether is there one science of all substances or not? For, if there is not one science of all, it would be difficult to render an account of what sort of substances there is one science in existence. If, however, there is one science of all substances, it is an obscure point how it is admissible that there should be the same science of many substances. Further, the question arises as to whether demonstration is conversant about substances only, or also about accidents. For, if demonstration be conversant at least about accidents, it is not conversant about substances. But if there is one demonstrative science about accidents, and another about substances, what, may I ask, is the character of both, and which of the two constitutes wisdom, or metaphysics? For demonstrative wisdom is that which is conversant with accidents. That, however, which is conversant with first principles is the wisdom that takes cognizance of substances. Neither, however, must we consider the science at present under investigation as a science respecting the causes that have been already enumerated in our treatise on physics. For neither should we act thus in regard of the final cause. For a thing of this kind is that which is good, and this resides in practical things, and in those entities that are in motion, and this imparts motion in the first instance, for the end is a thing of this sort. But the imparter of motion in the first instance does not inhere in those things that are incapable of motion. And, in general, one feels doubtful as to whether the science now under investigation is conversant about sensible substances at all, or not about these, but about certain other substances. For, if metaphysical science be conversant with substances different from those cognizable to the senses, it will be conversant either with forms or mathematical entities. As regards forms, then, it is evident that they have no existence. But, nevertheless, one would feel doubtful, even though he should admit the existence of these forms. Why, forsooth, as in the case of mathematical entities, the same truth does not hold good in regard of other things of which there are forms. Now, I say that they have placed mathematical entities, no doubt, as intermediate between forms and things cognizant by sense, as it were, certain third natures beside both forms and those things that are here, I mean sensibles. But there is no third man, nor a third horse, beside both actual man and actual horse and singulars. And if, on the other hand, these mathematical entities do not subsist in the manner they affirm, about what sort of entities are we to assert that the mathematician is engaged? For surely he is not engaged about those things that are here, that is, about sensibles, for none of these constitutes the description of entity which the mathematical sciences investigate. Neither, certainly, is the science now under investigation, I mean metaphysics, conversant about mathematical entities, for no one of these possesses a separable subsistence. Nor, however, is it a science belonging to substances, cognizant by the senses. For these are corruptible, And, in short, one would feel doubtful as to what sort of a science belongs the investigation of the matter of mathematical entities, for neither does it belong to physical or natural science, from the fact that the entire attention of the natural philosopher is engaged about those things that contain in themselves the first principle of motion and rest. Nor unquestionably is it the province of a science that institutes an inquiry respecting both demonstration and scientific knowledge, for respecting this very genus it creates for itself an investigation. It remains, therefore, that this proposed philosophy of ontology, or metaphysics, should make these a subject of its inquiry. And again, one would feel doubtful as to whether it is requisite to consider the science under investigation in the present treatise as conversant about first principles, I mean, such as by some speculators are denominated elements. These, however, have been regarded by all philosophers as things that are inherent in composite natures. But it would rather appear to be a thing that is necessary, that the science of ontology under investigation at present ought to be conversant with universals, for every rational principle and every science are conversant about universals, and not about the extremes of things. Wherefore, in this case, ontology would be conversant about primary genera. And these would constitute both entity and unity, for these especially would be supposed to comprise all existences, and in the most eminent degree to be assimilated unto first principles, on account of their being classed in the category of things that derive their primary existence from nature. For when these have been corrupted, other things also are corrupted at the same time along with them, for everything amounts to entity and unity. As far forth, however, as it is necessary that differential qualities participate of these, if one will admit the subsistence of these genera, now no difference participates in the genus, thus far, likewise, would it appear that we ought not to establish these either as genera or first principles, but further, on the supposition that that which is more simple is more a first principle than that which is less simple, but the extremes of those things that descend from the genus are more simple than the genera, for these are individuals, whereas the genera are divided into numerous species, and such as are different. Hence species would appear to be a first principle more than genera. As far forth, however, as species are liable to corruption in conjunction with their genera, the genera rather would seem to be more similar to first principles. For that which brings about the destruction of other things in conjunction with itself is a first principle. These, then, and other such points are some of those questions that involve matter of doubt. Chapter 2. Further, may the question be raised as to whether it is expedient to admit the existence of something besides and independent of singulars or not. But the science now under investigation is conversant with these. These are, however, infinite, those things at any rate which have a subsistence independent of, and beside singulars are, without doubt, either genera or species. But the science at present under investigation is not a science conversant about either of these, for the reason why this is impossible has been already stated. For in general, likewise, doth the following question involve a doubt, namely, as to whether it is necessary to suppose the existence of any substance separable from sensible substances, and those which are here, or whether this is not the case. But shall we say that these sensible things are entities, and that wisdom is conversant about these? For the fact is, we seem to investigate some different science, and this stands forth as the point proposed by us for investigation. Now, what I mean is this, that our aim is to discover whether there is anything that essentially involves a separable subsistence, and which does not reside in any nature belonging to those objects that are cognizant by the senses. But further, allowing that there is beside sensible substances any different substance, what sort of sensibles are those beside which it is requisite to establish the subsistence of this substance? For why should one seek to establish its existence beside men rather than horses, or beside these in preference to the rest of the animal creation, or in general to inanimate things likewise. Notwithstanding, the providing of different substances eternal in duration, equal in amount to substances that are cognizant by sense, and subject to decay, would appear perhaps to fall outside the province of the rational sciences. If, however, the first principle now under investigation be not separable from bodies, what other would one admit as existing in preference to matter? This, however, does not involve a subsistence in energy indeed, but in capacity. Rather, would species and form seem to be a first principle in a stricter sense of the word than this. Now, this is a thing that is subject to corruption. Wherefore, in short, there does not subsist an eternal substance that involves a separable existence as well as an essential subsistence. But such a position as this is absurd, for it appears to be the fact, and such are the subjects of inquiry at the hands nearly of all those that are most accomplished philosophers, that there is in subsistence a certain first principle and substance of this description. For how, let me ask, will there prevail order on the supposition that there is no subsistence of that which is eternal, and which involves a separable existence, and is permanent? But, further, admitting that there is a certain substance and first principle, naturally, of such a description as we are at present investigating, and this one principle belongs to all things, and the same is the principle of those things that are eternal, and those that are corruptible, the question in such a case arises, why, on the supposition of the existence of the same first principle, some things are eternal amongst those that may be ranked under this first principle, but others are not eternal, for this constitutes the absurdity. If, however, there is one first principle of things that are corruptible, and another of those that are eternal, if, indeed, the principle, likewise, of those that are corruptible be eternal, we shall be involved in similar perplexity. For why, on the supposition of the existence of an eternal first principle, are not those things that may be classed as effects under this first principle eternal likewise? And on the supposition of the existence of a corruptible first principle, there arises a certain other principle of this, and again a different one of that, and so this progression of causes goes on to infinity. But if, on the other hand, one will seek to establish the existence of both entity and unity as those things that appear in the most eminent degree to be immovable first principles, in the first place, unless each of them signifies this certain particular thing and substance, how will they involve a separate subsistence and an essential one? But it is respecting those eternal and original first principles of this description that we are engaged in our investigations in the present treatise. Nevertheless, supposing both of them to signify this certain particular thing, and substance, all the entities will be substances, for entity is predicated of all things, and unity also of some. That all entities, however, are substances is an assertion that is false. But further, how can the position of those be true who make out that unity is the first principle, and that this constitutes substance, and who from unity and matter generate the first number, and say that it is the substance of these? How, I say, does this assertion of theirs admit of being true? For how is it requisite intellectually to apprehend as one the duad and each of the other compound numbers? For on this point they neither say anything, nor would it be easy to make any assertion on the subject. Suppose, however, that any one will seek to establish, as first principles, lines, or the things that are connected consequentially with these. Now, I mean surfaces such as are primary. Yet these are not substances capable of a separate subsistence, but are sections and divisions, the former of surfaces, but the latter of bodies. But points are sections and divisions of lines, and further, they are the limits of these very same things, and all these are inherent in others, and there is no one of them that is separable. Further, in what way is it necessary for us to conceive the existence of a substance of unity and of a point, For of every substance is there generation, but of a point there is not, for a point amounts to division. And this likewise furnishes a subject of doubt, namely, that every science should be conversant about things that are universal, and about that which is of such and such a quality, but that substance should not belong to things universal, but rather should constitute this certain particular thing, and that which possesses a separable subsistence. Wherefore, if we admit that science is conversant about first principles, how is it necessary to consider substance as the first principle of things? Further, the question may be asked, is there anything beside entirety or not? Now, I mean by entirety matter and that which subsists in conjunction with this. For if in fact this be not the case, all things at least that reside in matter are subject to corruption. If, however, there subsists anything beside entirety, it would constitute the species and the form. In the case of what things, therefore, this would subsist, and in the case of what things it would not, it would be difficult to determine. For in the case of some things is it evident that the form is not a thing that is capable of a separate subsistence, as, for example, the form of a house is not separable from the house. And further, there is the question whether first principles are the same in species or in number, for if they are one in number, all things will constitute these. Chapter 3. Since the science of the philosopher, however, is conversant about entity, so far forth as it is entity, and this universally, and not as regards any one part, and since entity is multifariously predicated, and not in one way merely, this being the case, if entity be predicated equivocally, and not according to anything that is common, it does not fall under the province of one science to inquire into it, for there is not one genus of things of this kind. But if it be predicated according to anything that is common, it would fall under the notice of one science. Now, it appears that it is predicated after the same manner as both what is medicinal and salubrious, for likewise are both of these predicated multifariously. And in this way each is predicated in respect of the one being somehow referred to medicinal art, but the other to health, and a third to something else, yet each is referred to the same thing. For a medicinal discourse and a small knife are denominated in respect, the former of proceeding from medicinal science, but the other because it is serviceable to this art of medicine. And in like manner it is so with that which is salubrious. For a thing is termed thus, partly because it is indicative of health, and partly because it is productive of it. And the same mode exists in the case of other things. In the same way, therefore, is denominated entity in its entirety, for each of them is styled entity in respect of being a passion, or habit, or disposition, or motion, or something else of this sort, belonging unto entity, so far forth as it is entity. Since, however, there is a reduction of every entity to a certain one thing, and something which is common, so of contrarieties, likewise, each will be reduced to the primary differences and contrarieties of entity, whether multitude and unity, or similarity and dissimilarity, are the primary differences of entity, or whether there are certain other differences of such. For let these stand over as subjects for future discussion. But there is no difference whether the reduction of entity be made to entity or to unity, for even if they be not the same, but something different, they are at any rate convertible terms. For both unity also, in a manner, constitutes entity, and entity constitutes unity. Since, however, it is the province of one and the same science to speculate into all contraries, and since each of those is predicated according to privation, although, as regards some contraries at least, of which there is a certain medium, one would feel perplexed as to how they are predicated according to privation, as, for example, of the unjust and the just. This being the case, concerning all such contraries, I say, is it necessary, therefore, to posit privation as existing, not of the whole definition, but of the ultimate species. For instance, if one is a just man who, through a certain habit, has been from time to time obedient to the laws, the unjust man will not be altogether deprived of the entire definition of just man. But, inasmuch as in respect of habitual obedience to the laws he is in some point or degree deficient, in this respect, likewise, will there be inherent in him a privation of this definition. And in the same manner is it the case with other things. But as the mathematician institutes for himself an inquiry regarding abstract quantities, for he conducts his speculations by removing out of his consideration all sensible natures, such as gravity and lightness and hardness, and its contrary, and further also heat and cold, and other sensible contrarieties, but he merely leaves remaining quantity and continuity, some of which pertain to one, but others are in reference to two, and others to three, dimensions, as well as the passive conditions of these, as far forth as they are quantities and continuous. And this being the case, the mathematician does not speculate into them in reference to anything else, and of some things he examines into their natures and positions, one in respect of another, and into those things that are inherent in these, but of others into their commensurations and incommensurations, and of others into their ratios or proportions. But we, nevertheless, have established one and the same science as being conversant about all subjects of this kind, I mean, the science of the geometrician. In the same manner, therefore, is it the case in respect of entity likewise. For the things that are accidental in this, so far forth as it is entity, and the contrarieties of this, as far forth as it is entity, it is not the province of a different science from philosophy, that is, ontology, to investigate. For to physical or natural science may one ascribe the speculation of these, not as far forth as they are entities, but rather as far forth as they partake of motion. As to the sciences of the dialectician, however, and the sophist, they are sciences of the accidents, I admit, that reside in entities, but not so far forth as they are entities, nor do they speculate about entity itself, as far forth as it is entity. Wherefore, it remains that the philosopher or metaphysician should be a person qualified for speculating into the points we have just stated, in so far as they relate unto entities. Since, however, every entity is expressed according to some one thing, and something that is common, which is multifariously predicated, and as contraries are expressed in the same manner, for they are referred to the primary contrarieties and differential qualities of entity, and since it is possible that things of this kind should fall under the notice of one science, hence the doubt expressed in the opening parts of this work respecting first principles would be dissolved in this way. Now, the doubt I allude to is that wherein the matter of perplexity is involved in the question as to how there will be one science about entities that are many in number and which are generically different. Chapter 4. But since also the mathematician employs things that are common in a manner peculiar to himself, it would be the province of the first philosophy, that is, of ontology, to speculate into the original principles of these things. For that when from equals are taken away, the remainders are equal, is indeed a dogma that is common to all quantities. Mathematical science, however, speculates about a certain portion of matter, properly so called, appropriating it to itself, as for instance about lines, or angles, or numbers, or something else pertaining to other quantities, not, however, as far forth as they are entities, but so far forth as each of them is that which is continuous in one, or two, or three dimensions. Philosophy, however, does not institute an inquiry respecting those particulars that are contained in a certain portion of matter, as far forth as something amongst them is an accident in each of these, but it contemplates everything of this kind respecting entity, so far forth as it is entity, And in the same manner also does the case stand in regard of physical science as with mathematical, for physical or natural science speculates into the accidents or first principles of entities, so far forth as they are in motion, and not so far forth as they are entities. But we have said that ontology, or the first science, is conversant about these in as far as the subjects of them are entities, but not so far forth as they are anything that is different. Wherefore, we may set down that both this and the science of the mathematician are parts of wisdom or metaphysical science. Chapter 5. There is involved, however, in entities a certain first principle about which it is not possible to labour under any deception, but it is necessary invariably to do the contrary. Now, I mean, to speak conformably with truth, as, for instance, that it is not admissible that the same thing should be and not be in one and the same period of time. And the case is so with other things that are opposed to themselves in the same manner. And respecting points of this kind, demonstration indeed has no existence absolutely speaking, but in respect of this principle it has. For it is not possible to construct a process of syllogistic reasoning from a more trustworthy principle than this very axiom just mentioned, and it ought to be so, at any rate, if it is possible that there should subsist such a thing as a demonstration in absolute terms. As regards a person, however, who makes an assertion of opposite statements, for the purpose of proving wherefore it is false, must some such position be assumed, as that although the thing will actually be the same, with the non-possibility of being the same thing, and not being so at one and the same time, yet that it will not appear to be the same thing with it. For after this manner only can a demonstration be brought about in regard of one who affirms the admissibility of opposite assertions being verified of the same thing. And, in the next place, those people who are likely to take their share in mutual discussion ought in some degree to understand themselves. For in case this be not done, how will there subsist with these persons a community in regard of such mutual discussion? It is necessary, then, that each of the denominations should be known, and that they manifest some one thing, and not many things, but only one. And if it is equivalent in its signification to many things, one ought to make it evident towards which of these significations the denomination conducts one. Now, as regards a person who affirms that this thing both is and is not, this which he in general affirms to be, he affirms not to be. Wherefore, he asserts that the name signifies that which it does not signify, but this is impossible. Wherefore, if the assertion that the being of this particular thing involves any signification, it is impossible that contradiction concerning the same thing should be verified. Further, if a name has any meaning, and this be capable of verification, this also must needs be from necessity. But that which is from necessity it is not admissible at any time should not be. It is not for this reason, then, admissible that opposite assertions be true concerning the same thing. Further, on the supposition that assertion in no degree is more true than negation, the person who makes the affirmation that one is a man will in no wise the rather make a true statement than if he were to affirm that he is not a man. And a person who affirms a man not to be a horse would appear to speak truth, either in a greater or not in a less degree than if he affirms that man is not man. Wherefore, one who affirms also that the same is a horse will speak true. For in a similar way it would be possible that opposite assertions should admit of verification. Wherefore, the consequence ensues that the same creature should be man and horse, or something else belonging to the animal kingdom. There does not, therefore, subsist in regard of these any demonstration in absolute terms. As relates, however, to the person who is for establishing these foregoing points, demonstration has an existence. And quickly would one likewise, who after this manner had put the question to Heraclitus himself, force him to acknowledge that it is never a thing that is possible that opposite assertions should be verified of the same things. But at present not comprehending his own theory in regard of what he says at all, he has embraced this particular opinion we have been just endeavouring to overthrow. And, in general, if the statement made by Heraclitus be true, neither would this very position of his be true. Now, I mean the admissibility that at one and the same time the same thing should be and not be. For as also, on the supposition of these assertions having been divided, in no respect the more will affirmation be true than negation, in the same manner, likewise, will it be the case when both are conjoined and connected together, just as if affirmation is regarded as being one certain thing, in no degree the more will negation be true than the entire of the assumption which is made in an affirmation. Moreover, if it is possible to make no affirmation that is true, even would this very position be false, I mean, the assertion that no affirmation is true. If, however, there exists any assertion that is true, that point which is put forward by these Heraclitics would be decided, I mean, such philosophers as resist the truth of things of this sort, and in fact, altogether, do away with rational discussion. Chapter 6. But, similar to the statements that have been just made, is that which has been asserted by Protagoras. For, likewise, he said that man is a measure of all things, in this way affirming nothing else than that what appeared to every man, that this also, indubitably, is that which it appeared to be. If, however, this is admitted, the same thing will happen to be and not be, and to be both evil and good, and the rest of those things that are expressed in accordance with opposite assertions, from the fact that frequently to some persons indeed this particular thing appears to be fair, and the contrary to others, and from that which is apparent to every one constituting a measure. Now, this doubt would be resolved if persons considered whence the origin of this supposition has been derived. For to some speculators, no doubt, it would appear to have originated from the opinion of the physiologists or natural philosophers, but to others, from the circumstance that all men do not possess the same points of knowledge in respect of the same subjects, but that to some this particular thing seems to be sweet, and to others the contrary. For that nothing is generated from non-entity, but everything from entity, is almost a commonly received dogma amongst all natural philosophers. Since, therefore, that which is not white is generated from that which is perfectly white, and by no means not white, supposing now that what is not white has been generated from that which is not a white entity, that which is being generated as not white would be produced. Wherefore, such would be generated from non-entity, according to their doctrine, unless that which is not white were the same with that which is white. It would not, however, be difficult to decide this doubt, for it has been declared in our treatise on physics in what manner from that which is non-entity are generated the things that are being produced, and how it is that they are generated from entity. Notwithstanding the giving heed in like manner to both opinions and to the fanciful statements of persons who doubt in opposition to themselves, this would be a silly proceeding, for it is evident that one party amongst these sceptics must needs labour under fallacies. And this statement is manifest from observing things that are generated according to sense. For at no time does the same thing appear to some indeed sweet, and to others the contrary, provided that the organ which has the power of perceiving and deciding the above enumerated tastes has not undergone any corruption and injury in the case of these others. But on the understanding of such a state of things as this, we may suppose that some of them are a standard of measure, and suppose that others are not so. And in like manner, I assert this to be the case as regards both what is good and evil, and what is beautiful and disgraceful, and other things of the sort. For to lay down this as a principle, or to affirm the reality of nothing save the apparent, is a course nowise different from those who place their finger beneath the organ of vision, and thus from the one object make two to appear, and who really believe that there are two objects before them on account of their appearing such, and again that there is but one in reality. For to those persons who do not move their organ of vision, that which is one appears one. In general, however, it would be absurd, from the appearance of things that are here as subject to change, and which never permanently continue in the same dispositions, from this to come to any decision as regards truth. For it is necessary that we should go in pursuit of that which is true from amongst those things that invariably do subsist according to the same dispositions, and that never are instrumental in bringing about their own change. Now, of this description are those bodies that are regulated according to the orderly system of the universe. For these do not at one time appear of this particular sort, but at another time of a different kind, but invariably the same, and as participating in no change. But further, on the supposition of the existence of motion, and of something that is being moved, now everything which has motion impressed upon it is put in motion by something, and in the direction of something. In such a case, that which is being moved ought to be found, moreover, in that from which it will derive its motion, and yet not be found therein, and that it should be moved towards this particular place, and yet should not be generated in this. But how can such be the case? For we must bear in mind that even according to their own doctrines, that simultaneous verification is not possible as regards contradiction. And if, according to quantity, things which are here are continuously in a state of flux, and are being moved, and if one admits this, although it should not be true, why are they not permanent as regards quality? For these speculators in no small degree appear to predicate those things of the same thing, according to their contradictions, from the supposition that quantity does not continue permanently in bodies. Hence, with them the same thing is, and is not of 4 cubits in its dimensions. Substance, however, subsists according to quality, for this is of a definite nature, but quantity belongs to one which is indefinite. Further, why, let me ask, when the physician gives a prescription that his patients should take this particular food, why, I say, do they take it? For why is this particular piece of food bread rather than it is not bread? Wherefore, there would be no distinction in eating from not eating. At present, however, as the physician makes a true assertion about this thing, and this food that has been prescribed being in reality in existence, the patients accordingly take this food, although they ought not, at least, to do so on the supposition that there is no nature that is firmly permanent in sensibles, but that invariably all things are in motion and in a state of flux. But further, if indeed we are always undergoing a change, and never remaining permanently the same persons, why is it surprising if things never appear at any time to be the same as they do to those that are sick? For to these also, on account of their habit being not similarly disposed, as when they are in a healthy state, the things that subsist, according to the senses, do not appear to subsist in a similar manner. Those sensibles themselves participate in no change on account of this, at least, but produce different sensations in the sick, and sensations that are not the same. In the same manner, therefore, is it requisite, perhaps, that consequences be disposed as if the aforesaid change took place. If, however, we do not undergo a change, but continue to be the same, there would be something in existence that is permanent. Respecting, to be sure, Those persons, therefore, who entertain from principles of reason the doubts enumerated, it would not be easy to advance a refutation when they are not for admitting anything, and no longer demand a reason of those things. For all reasoning and every demonstration arise in this way. For when they are disposed to admit nothing, they overturn the thing in dispute, and, in general, all rational discussion. Wherefore, with such speculators, of course, there is no such thing at all as rational discussion. But in regard of those that labour under perplexity from the doubts that have been handed down, it would be easy to reply, and to unravel the difficulties that create in them the doubt referred to. Now, this statement is evident from those that have been made. Wherefore, it is evident from these things that it does not admit of being possible that opposite assertions about the same thing should be verified at one and the same time, nor that contraries should, on account of the denomination of all contrariety, according to privation. This, however, will be evident to those who resolve into their first principles the definitions of contraries. And, in like manner, neither is it possible that any of those things that are media should be predicated of one and the same thing. For, on the supposition of the subject being white, when we assert that this is neither white nor black, we shall make a false assertion. For it happens that this is white, and yet that it is not. For either of these connected together will be verified concerning this, but this amounts to a contradiction of what is white. Neither, therefore, is it possible for one who makes an assertion in accordance with the theory of Heraclitus, nor of Anaxagoras, to assert what is true. And if this be not admitted, the consequence will ensue that they predicate contrary things of the same subject. For when Anaxagoras says that in everything is contained a part of everything, he says that a thing is not more sweet than bitter, or anything else of the other contrarieties, if in everything all things subsist not merely in potentiality, but in energy or activity, and in a state of separation. And in like manner, neither is it possible that all assertions be false, nor all true, as well on account of many other difficulties which would be uttered in consequence of this position, as also because, as regards all assertions, supposing that they are false, neither will one who makes this very assertion speak what is true. But if all assertions are true, the person who says that all are false will not speak falsely. Chapter 7. But every science investigates into certain first principles and causes respecting each of those objects of knowledge that fall under its cognizance, as, for example, medicinal science, and that of the athlete, and each of the rest of the productive or the mathematical sciences. For each of these, having been for itself descriptive of a certain genus, treats concerning this as a thing existing, and as an entity, not, however, so far forth as it is an entity. Conversant, however, about this last named inquiry, is there, beside these sciences, this certain other science of the ontologist, which is different from them. But each of the above enumerated sciences, taking for granted the mode in which the nature of a thing subsists in each genus, endeavours to explain the remainder of the points relating to this more feebly or more accurately. They, however, make an assumption as to quiddity or the nature of a thing, some of them by means of sense, but others from hypothesis. Wherefore, it is also evident, from an induction of this sort, that there subsists no demonstration of substance and quiddity. Since, however, there exists a certain science which is conversant about nature, it is manifest that it will be different from both that which is practical science and that which is productive or effective. For of productive science the first principle of motion resides in the producing or efficient cause, and not in that which is being produced, and this either is some art or some other potentiality. And in like manner does the case stand with practical science also. The motion does not reside in the thing done, but rather in those who are agents. But the science of the natural philosopher is conversant about those bodies that involve in themselves a first principle of motion. That indeed, therefore, physical science must needs be neither practical nor productive, but speculative or contemplative, is evident from these statements. For there is the necessity of its falling under the classification of some one of these genera. And since in a manner it is requisite for each of the sciences to possess a knowledge of the nature of a thing, and to employ this as a first principle, we ought not to forget how a definition of this quiddity should be framed by the physical inquirer, and how the definition of substance is to be assumed, whether as the flat nose or rather as the hollow. For, as regards these, the formal principle, no doubt, of flat nose is denominated along with matter, I mean, such as belongs to the thing itself. The formal principle, however, of hollow nose is expressed without matter, for flatness of nose is generated in the nose. Wherefore also the definition or formal principle of it is inquired into along with this, for the flat nose constitutes a hollow nose. It is evident, therefore, that the definition both of flesh and of the eye and of the other parts of the body is always to be assumed along with matter. But since there exists a certain science of entity, so far forth as it is entity, and so far forth as it involves a separable subsistence, we must examine whether at all we are to consider this to be the same with natural or physical science, or rather to be different from it. Physical science indeed, then, is conversant about those bodies that involve in themselves a first principle of motion. But the science of the mathematician is itself a certain science that is speculative, I admit, and that, too, in regard of things that are permanent, but which do not involve a subsistence separable from sensibles. Respecting, then, that which is an entity capable of separate subsistence, and which is immovable, there exists a certain science different from both of these, on the supposition, of course, that there is some substance of this description in existence. Now, I speak of a substance separable and immovable, and it is the validity of this very position that we shall attempt to demonstrate. And if we admit that there subsists any substance of this sort in entities, here also, in a manner, would there be found divinity residing, and this would be an original and most dominant principle. It is evident, therefore, that there are three genera of the speculative sciences, namely, the physical or natural, the mathematical, and the theological. The most excellent, then, is certainly the genus of the speculative or contemplative sciences, and of these very sciences, that one which is mentioned last of the three possesses the greatest amount of excellence. For it is conversant about that one amongst entities which is more entitled to respect than the rest. Each science, however, is termed more excellent and more inferior according to its appropriate object of scientific knowledge. Now, a person might raise the question as to whether at all we ought to seek to establish universally the science of entity, so far forth as it is entity, or not. For each of the mathematical sciences, no doubt, is conversant about some one definite genus. The universal science, however, speculates in common respecting all things. If indeed, therefore, we admit physical substances to be the primary substances of entities, physical or natural science would also be the chief one amongst the sciences. But, on the other hand, if there exists a nature that is different, and a substance that involves a separable subsistence, and is immovable, it is necessary also that there belong to this a different science, and that this science should be antecedent to physical science, and universal in respect of its antecedence or priority. Chapter 8. Since, however, that which is entity simply considered is denominated in many ways, of which one is that which is spoken of as subsisting according to accident, in the first instance our examination must be instituted concerning entity in this point of view. That indeed, therefore, no one of the sciences that have been handed down from former generations is employed about what is accidental is evident. For neither does that relating to house-building or architectural art investigate into what is likely to be accidental with those who will make use of the house, for example, as to whether they will dwell there sorrowfully, or the contrary. Nor is it so with the art of weaving, nor of shoemaking, nor the cooking art. Each of these sciences, however, examines into that which is peculiar to its own department only, and this is its appropriate end. Neither does it consider a person so far as he is a musician and a grammarian, nor does it assert that he who is a musician, should he become a grammarian, will at the same time be both, though he were not so previously. But that which is not always an entity, this was generated at some time or other, so that such a person would at the same time become a musician and a grammarian. This, however, no one of those that are confessedly sciences examines into, with the exception of the science of the sophist, for this alone is employed about what is accidental. Wherefore Plato has not inaptly expressed himself when he affirms that the sophist wastes his time in the consideration of nonentity, but that it is not a thing that is admissible that there should be in existence a science of the accidental will be manifest to those who attempt to discern what an accident is at all. Therefore, as regards everything, we affirm one thing indeed to subsist always, and from necessity. Now, I mean by necessity, not that which is denominated according to what is violent, but what we employ in cases pertaining to demonstrations. But another thing we affirm as subsisting for the most part, and another neither as for the most part, nor always, and from necessity, but as may happen at any time to be casual. For example, cold might be prevalent when the sun is in Canis, but a thing of this sort would take place neither as always from necessity, nor as for the most part, but might nevertheless accidentally occur sometimes. Therefore does that constitute an accident which is produced, not always, nor from necessity, nor as for the most part. What indeed then an accident is, has been declared. But why there is not a science of a thing of this kind is evident. For every science is conversant about that which is an entity always, or as for the most part. But the accidental is not ranked amongst either of these. But it is evident that of what subsists according to accident, there are not causes and first principles of such a description as there are of that which is an entity that involves an essential subsistence. For if this be admitted, all things will be from necessity. For if on the supposition of this particular thing being a consequence of that particular entity, but this a result from that, and if this subsists not from its being casual, but from necessity. From necessity will be likewise that of which this was the cause, until that which is denominated the last effect. This, however, subsisted according to accident, so that all things will be from necessity, and the possibility for anything whatsoever casually to occur, and the existence of contingency, and the being generated, and the not being generated, will altogether be taken away from things that are being generated. For although a cause may be supposed not to be an entity, but that also which is being generated, the same consequences will ensue, for everything will be generated from necessity. For, to give an instance, tomorrow's eclipse will take place if this particular thing may happen, and this will happen if something else does, and this last if something else ensues. And doubtless in this manner, on the supposition that a portion of duration be taken away from that definite time, which may be measured from the present moment until tomorrow, one will ultimately arrive at that which is in being. Wherefore, since this is the case, all things that are subsequent to this will be from necessity. Wherefore, will it be the case that all things will be generated from necessity. As regards, however, that which is entity in reality, and not according to accident, one kind indeed is that which is contained in the comprehension of the intellect, and is a passive condition in this. Wherefore, respecting that which constitutes entity in this way, first principles are not investigated. But respecting that which is an entity external to this, and possessing a separable subsistence, they are. And that which subsists according to accident is not necessary, but indefinite. Now, I mean what subsists according to what is accidental, as in a less degree, but the causes of a thing of this sort are inordinate and infinite. But that on account of which a thing subsists, that is, the final cause, is classified amongst those things that are generated by nature, or that spring from intellect. It is chance, however, that generates them when any of these may be generated according to accident. For, in like manner, just as also entity constitutes in one respect that which is essential, but in another that which subsists according to accident, so also is it the case with a cause. But chance is a cause according to accident in those things that are being generated in accordance with free will, for the sake of something. Wherefore, chance and intellect are conversant about the same object, for free will is not devoid of a connection with intellect. The causes, however, are indefinite, from which might be generated that which arises from chance. Wherefore, obscure to human calculation is chance, even as a cause subsisting according to accident, but, absolutely considered, such is not a cause of anything, and chance is good and evil when what is good or worthless may happen to be the result. But mischance and misfortune are conversant about the magnitude of these. But since nothing that subsists according to accident is antecedent to those things that possess an essential subsistence, neither then are causes so. If then chance, or even spontaneity, be a cause of the firmament, prior as a cause will be mind and nature. Chapter 9. Now, one thing subsists in energy only, but another subsists in capacity, and a third in capacity and energy. And of these, one constitutes an entity, but the other a quantity, and the third something else of the rest of the categories. There is not, however, any motion beside the things themselves, for the change invariably takes place in accordance with the categories of entity, But in the case of these, there is not anything that is common, nor is there a thing of this sort in a single category. Everything, however, subsists in all things in a twofold manner, as, for instance, this particular thing, for this is the form of it, but that is its privation, and according to quality, one thing is white, but another black, and according to quantity, one is perfect, whereas the other imperfect, and according to motion, this tends upwards and that downwards, or the one is light, but the other heavy. Wherefore, there are as many species of motion and of change as there are of entity. But on account of there being a division in each genus, of the one into potentiality or capacity, of the other, however, into actuality, I style energy the motion of that which subsists in potentiality, so far forth as it does subsist in potentiality. And that we make a true assertion in this point is evident from the following circumstance. For when a material is fit for being built, so far forth as it is a thing of this sort, we say that this very thing subsists in energy, so far forth as it is being built, and this constitutes the structure or the mode of building. In like manner stands the case with disciplinary learning, healing and rolling, walking, leaping, growing old, advancing towards a state of maturity. It happens, however, that a thing is in motion when the actuality itself may exist, and when it is a thing neither antecedent nor subsequent to this. Therefore, entelikeia, or actuality, belonging to that which subsists in capacity, when subsisting in actuality it energizes, either as that which it is, or something else, so far forth as it is movable. This constitutes motion. Now, I mean by the expression, quote, so far forth, close quote, a subsistence whose mode I would illustrate as follows. For brass is a statue in capacity, but nevertheless, actuality of the brass, so far forth as it is brass, does not constitute motion. For it is not the same thing, the belonging to brass and to a certain capacity, since if it were the same, absolutely speaking, according to definition, the entelikeia, or actuality of the brass, would amount to a certain motion. It is not, however, the same. And this statement is evident as regards contraries, for the capacity of being in sound health and the capacity of being indisposed are not the same, for in such a case would the actual conditions of health and sickness be the same. But the subject that is capable of being made both healthy and diseased, whether it be moisture or whether it be blood, is one and the same thing. Since, however, the being of a thing is not the same with the being of a certain capacity, in the same way as neither is colour the same with what is visible, so the entelikeia, or actuality of that which is potential, so far forth as it is a thing that is potential, constitutes motion. That indeed, therefore, motion actually exists, and that a thing happens to be moved at the same time with its being itself actuality, and that it is a thing that is neither antecedent nor subsequent to this, is evident. For everything admits of subsisting at one time in energy, but at another time not in this state, as, for example, that which is fit for being built, so far forth as it is fit for being built, and the energy of that which is fit for being built, so far forth as it is fit for being built, constitute the mode or act of building. For the energy of this amounts either to the mode of building or the house built. But when the house may be finished, that is, when it constitutes the energy, it will no longer be a thing that is fit for being built. But, on the other hand, that which is fit for being built is actually built. It is necessary, then, that the mode or act of building amount to energy, but the mode or act of building amounts likewise to a certain motion, and the same reasoning holds good in the case of other motions. Now, that these assertions have been made correctly is evident from the statements which other philosophers have from time to time put forward in regard to motion, as also from the fact of its not being an easy matter to frame a definition of it in a different manner from the foregoing. For neither is one able to set it down as being contained in another genus, and it is evident from what these speculators say on the subject, for some of them, indeed, regard it as equivalent with diversity, and inequality, and nonentity, and yet not one of these necessarily should have motion imparted to it. But neither does there exist change or mutation into these either, nor from things of this kind more than from such as are opposed. But a cause of their setting down motion amongst things of this kind is as follows: because motion appears with them as something that is indefinite. Now, the first principles of a different coordinate series, from the fact of their being privative, are indefinite, for not one of these is either this particular thing or any other of the rest of the categories. But a cause of this view of motion, I mean of its appearing to be a thing that is indefinite, results from the fact that it is not possible to set it down under the category of the potentiality of entities, or under that of their energy or activity, for neither that which involves a capacity of being quantity has motion imparted to it necessarily, nor that which subsists as quantity in energy. And motion appears to amount to a certain energy or activity, no doubt. But an energy or activity which is imperfect, and a cause of this is the following: that which is potential, to which the energy belongs, is itself imperfect, and on this account it would be difficult, as regards this, to apprehend what it is. For it must necessarily be classed either into privation, or into capacity, or into simple energy, and not one of these does it appear admissible that motion should be considered. Wherefore it remains that it be what it has been declared to be, namely, both an energy or activity, and yet not such an energy as has been mentioned, for this would be an energy difficult to discern indeed, but nevertheless one which it is admissible should subsist. And that motion is to be found in that which is capable of being moved is evident, for the actuality of this lies under the influence of that which is capable of being moved, and the energy of that which is movable is not different from this, for it is necessary, surely, that there should subsist actuality in both. For a thing is movable in respect of its involving a capability of having motion impressed upon it, and that which imparts motion does so from energy or activity, but it thus acts from this energy in regard of that which is adapted for motion. Wherefore, in like manner, there resides one energy in both, just as from 1 to 2 is the same interval as from 2 to 1. And in regard of ascent and descent, the case is the same, but the essence in this instance is not one. And the same remark holds good, in like manner, with the power that imparts motion, and that which has motion impressed upon it thereby. Chapter 10. But the infinite either is that which it is impossible to pass through, in respect of its not being adapted by nature to be permeated in the same way as the voice is invisible, or it is that which possesses a passage without an end, or that which is scarcely so, or that which by nature is adapted to have, but has not a passage or termination. Further, a thing is infinite from subsisting by addition or subtraction, or both. It is indeed possible, therefore, that the infinite should constitute a certain entity that involves a separable subsistence, but that it is cognizant by sense is not possible. For if it constitutes neither magnitude nor multitude, and if the infinite be a substance and not an accident of this, it will be indivisible. For that which is divisible amounts either to magnitude or multitude. But if it be indivisible, it will not be infinite, unless in the same way as the voice is invisible. They do not, however, say so, nor do we inquire into the subject, but we consider it as a thing without any passage, or in other words, impermeable. Further, let me ask, how is it possible that what is essentially infinite should exist, unless there should happen to subsist number and magnitude, of which, too, the infinite is a passive condition? Moreover, if the infinite subsists according to accident, it would not constitute an element of entities, as far forth as it is a thing that is infinite, in the same manner as neither is that which is invisible an element of speech, although the voice is invisible. And that it is not possible for the infinite to subsist in energy is evident, for any part whatsoever of itself that is assumed will be infinite. For the being of the infinite and a thing which is infinite are the same, if the infinite be substance, and not that which is predicated of a subject. Wherefore it is either indivisible or divisible in a progression ad infinitum, if it be made up of parts that are or may be divisible. That many infinites, however, should be the same thing is impossible, for as air is a part of air, so infinite is a part of that which is infinite, if it is substance and a first principle. The infinite, then, is devoid of parts and indivisible. But it is impossible that an entity that subsists in actuality should be infinite, for it must needs constitute quantity. It subsists, then, according to accident. But if this be the case, it has been declared that it is not possible that it should be a first principle. But this must be affirmed of that to which it happens that number or evenness should be such. The investigation, therefore, is itself universal. That the infinite, however, does not subsist in things that are cognizant by sense is evident from the following circumstances. For on the supposition that the definition of body amounts to that which is bounded by surfaces, body would not be infinite, either that which is cognizable by sense or by the understanding, nor will it be number as actually separated and infinite, for number is that which is numerable, or which involves number. That the infinite, however, cannot subsist in things cognizant to the senses, regarded in a physical point of view, is evident from these following reasons. For neither is it possible that it should be a composite nature, nor one which is simple. For if you admit that it is a composite nature, it will not be a body if the elements are limited in multitude. For it is requisite that we should equalize the contraries, and that one of them should not be infinite. For if in any degree whatsoever the potentiality of the other body fails, the finite will be corrupted by the infinite body. But it is impossible that each of the elements should be infinite, for body is that which in every direction involves an interval, but that which is infinite is that which involves an interval without end. Wherefore, if there is in existence an infinite body, it will be infinite in every direction. Neither, however, can there be in existence one infinite simple body, nor, as certain philosophers would lay down, can it subsist as different from, or independent of, the elements from whence they generate these things. For there is not in existence a body of this description beside the elements, for all those things of which they are compounded are resolved into these. This, however, does not appear to subsist beside the simple bodies, either fire or any other of the elements. For without some one of them being infinite, it is impossible that the universe, if it may be finite, should either be or be generated from some one of the elements, as Heraclitus says that all things were originally fire. And there is the same mode of reasoning also in the case of unity, the existence of which natural philosophers introduce besides the elements. For everything undergoes a change from its contrary, as from heat into cold. Further, a body cognizant by the senses is situated in a certain place, and there is the same place of the whole as of the part, of the earth, for instance, as of one of its clods. Wherefore, if the infinite be of similar parts indeed, it will be immovable, or always will be impelled forwards. But this is impossible. For why, may I ask, should it be moved downwards in preference to upwards, or in any direction whatsoever? For instance, if it were a clod of earth, in what direction will this be moved? Or in what place will it remain at rest? For the place of the body naturally adapted to this will be infinite. Will it then comprise the entire place? And how will this be so? What, therefore, will be its place of rest and its motion? Or shall we say that it will remain at rest everywhere? It will not then be moved, or shall we say that it will be moved in every direction? It will not then stand still. If the universe, however, be of dissimilar parts, places likewise would be dissimilar, and in the first instance, no doubt, the body of the universe would not be one, save in respect of contact. In the next place, these things will be either finite or infinite in species. That they should be finite is not certainly then possible, for some indeed will be infinite, and some not so, on the supposition that the universe is infinite, for instance, fire or water, and a thing of this kind will be corruption to contraries. If, however, they are infinite and simple, both the places will be infinite, and infinite will be the elements. But if this is impossible, and the places be finite in number, the universe also must needs be finite. And in general, it is impossible that there can be an infinite body, and a place for bodies, if every body that is cognizant by the senses involves gravity or lightness. For it will have an impulse either towards the centre or upwards. It is impossible, however, that the infinite, either the whole or the half, or any part whatsoever, should undergo a passive state. For in what way would you make a division of it? Or of the infinite, how will there be one portion tending in a direction downwards, and the other in a direction upwards? Or how will this constitute the extremity, and that the centre? Further, every body that falls under the notice of the senses subsists in place, and there are 6 species of place. But it is impossible that these should subsist in a body that is infinite. And upon the whole, if it is impossible that place should be infinite, it is likewise impossible that body should be so. For that which subsists in place is somewhere, and this signifies a direction, either upwards or downwards, or some one of the rest of the categories, and each of these constitutes a certain limit. But the infinite is not the same in magnitude and motion, and duration, as if it were a certain single nature. But that which is subsequent is denominated according to that which is antecedent, as, for instance, motion is denominated according to, or conformably with, the magnitude in regard of which the motion, or the alteration, or the increase is brought about. Time, however, is reckoned or computed in consideration of motion. Chapter 11. Now, that which undergoes a change is changed partly indeed according to accident, as when we say the musician walks, and partly when a thing is said simply to be changed in respect of something belonging to this undergoing a change. For example, whatsoever things are changed according to parts. For the body is reduced to a sound state of health because the eye is restored to a healthy condition. Now, there is something which primarily is moved in itself or essentially, and this is that which may have motion impressed upon it from itself. And there is also something of the same sort in the case of that which imparts motion likewise. For one thing imparts motion according to accident, and another according to a portion, but a third essentially or of itself. And there is something that is the primary source of motion, and there is something that has motion impressed upon it. Further, is there the time in which, and there is the place from which, and the direction towards which a thing is moved. But the forms and passive states and place into which are moved the things that are being moved themselves are immovable, as science and heat. But the heat does not constitute motion, yet the process of heating does. The change, however, that does not ensue according to accident does not reside in all things, but in contraries and media, and in contradiction. But a reliance upon this statement may be drawn from induction. Now, that which undergoes a change is changed either from a subject into a subject, or from that which is not a subject into a subject, or from a subject into a non-subject, or from a non-subject into a subject. But I mean by a subject that which is made manifest by affirmation. Wherefore, changes must needs be three in number, for that which is from a non-subject into a non-subject is not properly a change, for it subsists neither between contraries nor between contradiction, because there is not opposition in the case of a transition from a non-subject into a non-subject. The change indeed, therefore, from that which is a non-subject into a subject according to contradiction amounts to generation, and such a change, of course, when simply considered, is simple generation, and when it is partial generation. But the change from subject into that which is non-subject amounts to corruption, which, when it is simply so, is simple corruption, but when it is partial corruption. If, therefore, non-entity is predicated multifariously, and that according to composition or division does not admit of being put in motion, so neither can it be so with that according to capacity, which is opposed to that which subsists simply. For a thing that is not white, or not good, nevertheless admits of being moved according to accident. For that which is not white may be a man. But this cannot by any means be the case with this particular thing which subsists simply, for it is impossible that non-entity should be moved, and if this be admitted, it is impossible also that generation amounts to motion, for non-entity would be produced if it did, for in such a case, most especially, would it be produced according to accident. Yet, nevertheless, it is true to assert of that which is generated simply, that a non-entity has a subsistence. In like manner also stands the case with the being in a state of rest. And, doubtless, such are the difficulties that attend on this hypothesis, even on the supposition that everything that is being moved is in place, but what is a non-entity is not in place, for it would be somewhere. Hence, neither does corruption constitute motion, for motion or rest is a thing that is contrary to motion, but corruption is contrary to generation. Since, however, every motion amounts to a certain change, and there are 3 changes, as just now enumerated, and of these the changes that ensue according to generation and corruption are not motions, and these are those that subsist according to contradiction, it is necessary that the change from subject into subject should alone constitute motion. Subjects, however, are either contraries or media, and let privation be considered as a thing that is contrary, and it is made manifest by affirmation, for instance, that which is naked and toothless, and that which is black. Chapter 12. If, therefore, the categories are divided by substance, quality, place, action or passion, relation, quantity, there must needs subsist 3 motions of quality, quantity, and of place. But according to substance there does not subsist any motion on account of there being nothing contrary to substance. Nor is there a motion of relation, for it is possible, when either of the relatives has not undergone a change, that a verification should take place in regard of the other, as having undergone no change. Wherefore the motion of these will subsist according to accident. Neither is there motion of that which is active and passive, or of that which is the efficient cause of motion, and has motion impressed upon it, because there is not a motion of motion, nor a generation of generation, nor in general a change of a change. For in 2 ways is it possible that there be a motion of a motion, first, either as of a subject, for instance, as man is moved, because from white he is changed into black. Wherefore, thus also is it with motion, either a thing is made warm or cold, or undergoes alteration in place or increase. This, however, is impossible, for the change does not amount to any of the subjects. Or, secondly, there may subsist a motion of motion, in respect of some different subject, from change being altered into a different form, as man is changed from sickness into health. Neither, however, is this possible except according to accident, for every motion constitutes a change from one thing into another, and in like manner the case stands with generation and corruption, except that those changes, I admit, that are wrought from things that are posed in this or that way are not motions. At the same time, then, is man changed from health into disease, and from this very change into a different one. It is therefore evident that, when a man shall have become indisposed, he shall undergo a change into a disease of some sort or other, for it is admissible for such to remain in a state of rest. And further, it is evident that he will not be changed into that state which is invariably casual, and that will amount to a change from something into something else, so that health will be an opposite motion, but from accident, as for instance, one undergoes an alteration from memory into oblivion, because that wherein oblivion is inherent undergoes a change, sometimes into scientific knowledge, and sometimes into health. Further, will the progression advance on to infinity if there will subsist a change of a change, and a generation of a generation? Therefore also must there be the former, on the supposition that there is the latter. For instance, if the simple act of generation take place at any time, that also which is being generated simply has been produced. Wherefore, not as yet in existence would be that which is being produced simply, but something does exist that is being generated or produced, or which already has been generated. If, therefore, also, this thing once was generated, for what reason was that not yet in existence which is being then generated? Since, however, as regards things that are infinite, there does not subsist anything that is primary, there will not be that which is first generated, and for this cause, neither that which is in order consequential. Therefore, that any of these either should be generated, or be moved, or undergo any change is not possible. Further, contrary motion, and rest, and generation, and corruption will belong to the same subject. Wherefore, a thing that is being generated, when it may become that which is being generated, is then undergoing a process of corruption. For neither is it immediately corrupted as soon as it is generated, nor subsequently to this, for that must necessarily exist which is undergoing a process of corruption. Further, it is the case that matter ought to subsist under that which is being generated, and undergoing a change. Therefore, what matter will there subsist in like manner as an alterable body or soul? In this way also, anything that subsists on being produced constitutes either motion or generation. And further, what is that into which the thing is moved? For it is necessary that something amount to the motion of this particular thing from this particular thing into that, and yet that it should not be motion at all. How, let me ask then, is this to take place? For the generation of discipline does not amount to discipline, so neither is it true to say that there will subsist a generation of generation. Since, however, there is not in existence motion either of substance, or of relation, or of action and passion, it remains that there should subsist motion according to quality, and quantity, and place. For to each of these doth there belong contrariety. Now, I mean by motion according to quality, not that which is found in substance, for difference also constitutes quality, but that which is passive in accordance with which a thing is said to be passive, or to be devoid of passion. With regard, however, to that which is immovable, and that which, upon the whole, it is impossible should have motion impressed upon it, and that which with difficulty, in a long portion of duration, or slowly, commences its motion, and that which, having been by nature, no doubt, adapted for having motion imparted to it, yet does not possess the capacity or ability of being moved when it is naturally fitted for motion, both as to the place where and the manner how, this is what I term merely a condition of rest amongst those things that are immovable. For rest is a thing that is contrary to motion. Wherefore, it would amount to a privation of that which is receptive or capable of motion, and things are said to be moved according to place at the same time as many as are to be found in one original locality. And those things are said to be moved separately as many as are to be found in a different place. And things are said to be in contact with each other, the extremities of which subsist together. And that is a medium into which that is fitted by nature first to proceed, which is undergoing a change, before it arrives at that into which it is ultimately changed. I mean, what is uninterruptedly undergoing a change according to the constitution of nature. A thing is contrary in regard of place, which in a straight line is at the greatest distance possible, and a thing is successive between which, when it is after its first principle, either in position or form, or some other definite mode of subsistence, and that to which it is consequent, there subsists no intervening medium of things in the same genus. For instance, lines are successive to a line, or monads are successive to a monad, or a house to a house. There is no hindrance, however, to their subsisting any other medium between them, for that which is successive belongs to something in succession, and is something that is subsequent, for 1 is not successive to 2, nor are the kalends to the knowns. And a thing is coherent which, being successive, is in contact. Since, however, every change takes place in those things that are opposed, and these are contraries and contradiction, and since of contradiction there is nothing that is a medium, it is evident that in contraries there subsists a medium, and that which is continuous is that which has something of the nature of the coherent, or of that which is in a state of contact. And a thing is called continuous when the extremity of either of the parts by which they are in contact and in continuity may be one and the same. Wherefore it is evident that what is continuous is to be found amongst those things from which, as compounds, there subsists any one thing naturally adapted for being generated according to contact. And that what is successive ranks as what is primary is evident likewise. For everything that is successive does not subsist in a state of contact, but this is the case with what is successive on the supposition that what is continuous subsists in a state of contact. Even, however, though they should subsist in a state of contact, they yet by no means amount to that which is continuous. Those things, however, in which there is not found contact, there does not subsist natural coherence in. Wherefore, a point is not the same thing with a monad, for indeed in points may be found contact, but this is not the case with monads, but these are successive to each other, and between points there may be found a certain medium, whereas we cannot discover any such between monads. End of Book 10.